right, so let's transport ourselves back in time for a bit, back to 1960s Rome, the era of La Dolce Vita.
Ah, la Dolce Vita.
Exactly. It conjures up images of, Fellini films, Vespas zipping through those charming streets, and a society kind of embracing this newfound prosperity.
Yeah, that carefree, exuberant spirit. It really defined the era, didn't it? A time of economic boom and, yeah, as you said, a loosening of social norms.
Right, but as we're going to uncover today, even in the heart of all that glamour, there were undercurrents, tensions that were bubbling beneath the surface. And one event really brought this to light, a crime that became known as the murder of the Dolce Vita.
It really did. It shattered the illusion and exposed a darker side to that seemingly perfect world.
So let's set the stage. January 20, 1964. An ordinary workday in Rome. A secretary arrives at the Tricotex textile company. It's on Via Lazio, this quiet side street just off the bustling Via Veneto.
Not exactly where you'd expect a gruesome crime to unfold, right?
Right. And yet she walks in, and instead of finding, her colleagues in the usual office bustle, she stumbles upon a scene that's straight out of a crime thriller. The body of the company owner, 27-year-old Farouk Chourbagi.
The discovery of Farouk's body was shocking enough, but the details, they were absolutely chilling. I mean, this wasn't just a simple murder. He had been shot not once, but 4 times. And to make matters even worse, his face was disfigured with acid.
It's just a brutal, almost symbolic act. It's like whoever did this wanted to send a message.
Exactly. It went beyond just taking a life. There was a clear intent to dehumanize, to make a statement.
Now, before we dive into the specifics of the investigation, I think it's important to kind of step back for a moment and really try to grasp the essence of La Dolce Vita. It wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was a whole cultural phenomenon.
Absolutely. Italy, especially Rome, was at the center of this post-war economic boom. It became a magnet for artists, intellectuals, the international jet set. It was all about embracing life, indulging in pleasure, pushing boundaries.
Right, so it was this fascinating mix of liberation and maybe a touch of excess.
Definitely. And I think that's what makes the Bebawi case so compelling. It exposes that tension between the surface glamour and the darker undercurrents that were always present. It's like those classic Italian films of the era,
Hmm.
where beauty and darkness are constantly intertwined, playing off each other.
Yes, that's such a perfect analogy. And the Bebawi case really throws that into sharp relief, doesn't it? It's like the underbelly of La Dolce Vita suddenly bursting into view.
Precisely. It's a stark reminder that picture-perfect moments often have a hidden side, a story that isn't being told.
Okay, so back to that chilling crime scene. Where did the investigation lead the police? What were some of the initial clues they uncovered?
Well, a seemingly minor detail really caught their attention. The secretary remembered a phone call from just a few days before the murder. A woman with a distinct Egyptian accent had had this heated, pretty disturbing argument with Farouk. She identified the woman as Gabrielle Claire Bebawi, Farouk's lover.
Ah, so right from the start, we have that classic love triangle element.
Yeah.
Tell me more about Claire and her connection to Farouk.
Well, the police quickly uncovered this affair that had been going on for about 3 years. Claire was married to an Egyptian industrialist named Youssef Bebawi. They lived in Lausanne, Switzerland. But Claire, she made these frequent trips to Rome, presumably to see Farouk.
Wait, so hold on. They lived in Switzerland, but they just happened to be in Rome on the day of the murder.
Yeah, that's right. That immediately raised some red flags for the investigators. It definitely shifted their focus onto the Bebawis, especially knowing about Claire's connection to the victim.
It seems like one of those coincidences that are just a little too convenient, right?
Exactly. And as we often see in these kinds of cases, those coincidences rarely turn out to be coincidental. And there was another piece of information that really piqued their interest.
Okay, I'm all ears. What was it?
During the investigation, they discovered that Claire had recently bought a bottle of acid in Switzerland. Now, remember, Farouk's face was disfigured with acid.
Oh, wow. So that seemingly insignificant purchase suddenly became a major link to the crime scene.
Exactly. It was still circumstantial, but it was enough to make them really focus on Claire as a prime suspect. But the story, it gets even more complicated from there.
So we've got this really tense situation.
Hmm.
The Bebawis are already persons of interest, right? Because of their connection to Farouk and the fact that they were in Rome at the time.
Mm.
And then you add the acid purchase on top of that. So what happened when the police actually confronted them?
Well, this is where the case takes this really dramatic turn. Get this. During questioning, Yusuf claimed that he had dropped Claire off at Farouk's office on the afternoon of the murder. He said it was for some kind of decisive meeting, whatever that means.
Decisive meeting. It sounds ominous, doesn't it? Like something big was about to go down.
Right. And then he claims that Claire returned a short time later, and she confessed to him that she had shot Farouk.
Wait, so he's basically saying he was totally clueless, just an innocent chauffeur driving his wife to her lover's office? Come on, that's a pretty hard story to swallow, isn't it?
It does seem pretty far-fetched, I'll give you that. And it gets even more tangled because Youssef also claimed that he saw the gun and the empty acid bottle, too. So he's piling on the evidence against Claire, even while he's trying to distance himself from the whole thing.
Wow, so it was a classic case of he said, she said, except the stakes are incredibly high. What was Claire's side of the story?
Oh, she completely denied everything. She said she was at Farouk's office. That part she admitted. But she claimed that Youssef showed up with a gun. There was a struggle. And according to her, he was the one who shot Farouk and then threw acid on his face.
So we have these two completely different narratives, two versions of the same event, each one pointing the finger at the other spouse. It's like a mirror image, but with deadly consequences.
It really is. It's one of those situations where the truth becomes incredibly slippery. Who do you believe? It's a husband and wife, each accusing the other of murder. It's a recipe for chaos.
And to make things even more difficult for the investigators, this was 1964. We're talking about a time before DNA evidence, before all the sophisticated forensic techniques we have today.
That's a really crucial point. They couldn't rely on scientific evidence to corroborate either story. It all boiled down to witness testimony, which, as we've seen, was completely unreliable in this case.
So without that concrete evidence, how did the investigation proceed? It must have been incredibly frustrating for the police.
Oh, I'm sure it was. It was basically their word against hers, and they were both sticking to their stories. But despite the lack of hard evidence, the police decided to move forward.
Really? So they charged them with murder, even with all that uncertainty?
They did. The Bebawis were arrested in Athens, extradited back to Italy, and put on trial. And as you can imagine, the trial itself became a huge media sensation. It was a scandal of epic proportions, especially given the whole La Dolce Vita backdrop.
Oh, I bet. It's like something ripped from the headlines, a real-life drama unfolding in the heart of glamorous Rome. Did the trial manage to bring any clarity to this situation? Did it help to untangle those conflicting narratives?
Well, that's the thing. The defense attorneys for each spouse, they really played into the public fascination. Claire was portrayed as this tragic figure, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, seeking passion, but also trying to protect her social standing. It was a very calculated strategy designed to appeal to certain sympathies.
And what about Youssef's defense? How did they try to paint him in a favorable light?
His lawyers, they presented him as the desperate husband, trying to salvage his marriage and his honor, a victim of circumstance. It was all about playing into traditional gender roles and societal expectations. It's interesting, isn't it, how those stereotypes really influence the legal proceedings?
It really highlights the way these cases, they're not just about the facts. They become these battlegrounds for competing narratives, each side trying to control the story, trying to shape public perception. It's fascinating and a bit unsettling, too.
Absolutely. And in the end, despite all the drama and intrigue, the first trial ended with a surprising outcome.
What happened? Were they convicted?
No, they were actually acquitted. The jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict because of the lack of solid evidence. So they walked free, much to the dismay of the prosecution, I'm sure.
Wow, so after all that, they were set free. It's amazing and a little bit frustrating, right? To think that justice might not have been served.
It's a reminder that the legal system, it doesn't always get things right. But the story, it doesn't end there. The prosecution, they weren't ready to give up. They appealed the verdict, and in 1968, a second trial took place. And this time, things went very differently.
So the prosecution, they just wouldn't let it go, huh? I guess you can kind of understand that, right? It's this high-profile case, lots of public pressure to get a conviction. Makes you wonder what changed between those two trials. Was there some new evidence that came to light?
Well, not really. No new evidence emerged, but the context had shifted significantly. The second trial took place in a very different Italy. 4 years had passed, and the public's initial fascination with the case had given way to, well, a growing sense of unease. Almost like they were demanding justice, even if the evidence was still circumstantial.
It's like the collective need for closure, right?
Yeah.
Especially after such a shocking crime, even if it means maybe overlooking some of those lingering doubts.
Exactly. And the prosecution, they were very aware of this sentiment. They really played into that, They framed the Bebawis' escape as an admission of guilt. Like they were running because they knew they were guilty.
It's a powerful narrative, for sure, even if it's not based on on hard facts, it definitely taps into that emotional undercurrent that was swirling around the case.
Absolutely. And it seems to have worked, because in this second trial, both Youssef and Claire, they were found guilty of murder.
Wow, so a complete reversal from the first trial. What were their sentences?
Youssef received 22 years and Claire 20, but there was a catch. They were convicted in absentia.
In absentia. So they weren't even present for the verdict. Did they know it was coming?
It seems so. They had fled Italy before the second trial even concluded, almost as if they had anticipated the guilty verdict.
It's almost like they confirmed their own guilt by running, right? Even if technically, legally, they hadn't been proven guilty yet?
Yeah, it definitely adds to the intrigue of the case. And despite numerous attempts to extradite them, even after the Italian Supreme Court upheld their sentences in 1974, they managed to evade justice. They vanished, disappeared into thin air.
So they were never caught, never served their sentences.
Nope. They successfully escaped accountability, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a story that just refused to die.
It's incredible. A little bit infuriating, too, I have to admit.
Yeah.
But it makes the whole case even more fascinating, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The Bebawi case, the murder of the Dolce Vita, as it came to be known, it continues to captivate and intrigue. It has all the ingredients of a classic thriller, you know. Love, betrayal, a brutal murder, and a daring escape. It's like something ripped from the pages of a novel.
And it's spawned so many adaptations, too, hasn't it? Books, movies, even other podcasts.
Yeah.
Like this one, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. There have been 2 television movies, countless documentaries, episodes dedicated to the case on shows like Deliti, Stellener, Il Giaio Il Nero, even a podcast episode on Demoni Urbani. People can't seem to get enough of it. It's a story that just sticks with you.
I think it's because it taps into something deeper.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about the crime itself. It's about the illusions of La Dolce Vita, that
Yeah.
carefree, glamorous world that maybe wasn't so carefree after all.
Yeah, it makes you question everything, doesn't it? Was it all just a facade, a beautiful mask hiding something much darker and more sinister? And if so, who were the real victims? Farouk, obviously, but maybe also Claire and Youssef. Were they victims of their own desires, their own ambitions?
It's those questions that really linger, don't they? And maybe there are no easy answers. Maybe that's part of what keeps us coming back to the story, trying to piece together the truth from these fragments of memory, these conflicting narratives. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
It's a puzzle that might never be fully solved, but it's a puzzle worth contemplating nonetheless. Because in the end, the Bebawi case, it's not just a crime story. It's a story about human nature, about the choices we make, and the consequences that follow. It's a story that reminds us that even in the brightest light, shadows can lurk, and that sometimes the most glamorous facades can conceal the darkest truths.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. A story that stays with you, that makes you question, that reminds you that even in the midst of La Dolce Vita, life can take some very dark turns. So for all of you listening out there, I encourage you to delve deeper into the Bebawi case, explore those different perspectives, and draw your own conclusions. Because maybe, just maybe, in trying to understand this crime, we might just learn something about ourselves and the world we live in.